All right, thank you everyone for taking your lunch hour with us. Again, this is Kathy Clark from Elastio. Thank you for joining us for proactive threat detection on AWS Backup Recovery Points. We've got a really great session today, so anxious to get going. This is the agenda for the webinar. We're going to go over the state of ransomware. We're going to talk about the NIST framework, in particular the protect, detect, and recovery pillars. The defense in-depth architecture using AWS Backup, how to build a ransomware recovery solution using AWS Backup and Elastio. And then lastly, we're going to go into some use cases and success stories. Our speakers today are Naj Hussain from Elastio. We have Sabbath Venick. I'm going to mess this up, Sabbath. I apologize. Venick Apathy. He's the Enterprise Solutions Architect from AWS, and Chris Daniluk from the CEO from Rhythmic Technologies. All right, so to kick us off, we're going to have Naj discussing the state of ransomware threats.
Cybersecurity, and especially ransomware, are a big challenge across the globe. We've all heard about them. Per Gartner, 75% of IT organizations will face one or more ransomware threats by 2025. I mean, that's an astonishing number, and so much so that it's become a board-level problem. The reason is a ransomware attack can have a negative impact on revenues, cause reputational damage, and productivity losses. So it's a big, big problem. Think about this, there's 2,200 ransomware attacks per day. So unfortunately, it's not a matter of if, but when we're going to experience an event. So today you'll learn about how AWS Backup and Elastio can help ensure your data is protected and recoverable at all times. So let's talk about cyber threats and how it impacts recoverability. So data protection used to mean, we all know this, data protection used to mean things like protecting against software issues, in the old days, hardware failures, application outages, potentially user errors. In today's cloud world, the issues now are all around cyber threats, and they're typically caused by misconfigurations, IAM misconfigurations, system vulnerabilities, storage vulnerabilities on third-party software. So there's many, many different ways that cyber threats now can infiltrate your data. So many companies focus a lot of attention on the prevention side of ransomware, and they don't focus so much on what's in the data. So as Gartner argues in the Maverick report, companies should think about spending more on resilience initiatives than on the prevention side, because it's inevitable. They basically say embrace the breach, right? So it's going to happen. So what can we do to help protect against that threat? So let me give you an example of how easy it is to get attacked. So here's a typical example of vulnerability attack. I have a cloud workload in EC2. It's exposed to the internet. Most of us have those, and it has an exploitable vulnerability in it. It could be 0-day, it may not be. So this vulnerability is exploited, and the bad guy drops a payload on an EBS volume or on some persistent storage. So these guys are pretty smart now. So what they do is, this thing will just sit there dormant. It'll hang out. The average dwell time is 72 days, just so you know. So that data now is replicated. It's in your pipeline now. It gets backed up. Now all of a sudden I have multiple copies of this threat sitting in my infrastructure. Now snapshots in Amazon are opaque, so you don't really know what's going on. You don't have visibility inside of that snapshot. So right now the snapshot's replicated, backed up, and I have these copies. So the problem here is, and typically in Amazon, the retention periods are more like 7 to 30, 35 days long. So with a dwell time of 72 days, you can see the problem now. So basically my retention overruns my recovery points, and now I end up with all infected recovery points. So the best case scenario in this situation is, when I try to do a recovery here, is that it'll be a manual process and it'll be time consuming. So I have to figure out how to restore this to a sandbox, surgically figure out what's corrupted, and try to get my data back. Most likely, however, it's going to be lost data and long downtime. And that's the box you don't want to be in. So this is where AWS Backup and Elastio can help to avoid this problem. So let's bring it back to the NIST framework. So let's map out data protection in this framework in relation to how to protect the data. So on the protect side, you want to think about in your strategy how do we protect our data to insulate it from malicious actors? What does that mean? So probably immutability is very important. Air gapping, very important. Isolation of where you keep your cyber vault, very important. So Sabbath will jump into that and how AWS Backup has that framework to really tighten down where your data sits and how to insulate it and protect it from the bad actors. And then we want to think about how do we ensure to the business that our data is clean, recoverable, and non-compromised. That's a big issue, right? So we have to be able to go upstairs and say, yep, I know that my data is recoverable from this point in time. And then you'll be surprised, what is your recovery plan in case of a cyber attack? Many companies don't have a cyber recovery plan. And that's a big issue for many companies, and it adds to the risk of a cyber attack. So it's imperative that recovery plans are built and tested. And then what are the trade-offs that should be made among budget, time, and data completeness? So these are the kind of things that we think are important to think about as you're thinking about protecting your data and making sure you're cyber recovery ready. So let me pass it on to Sabbath, and he can jump into a defense in depth architecture using AWS Backup.
Thanks, Naj, for setting the stage on the existing threat landscape related to ransomware. So as an introduction, AWS Backup is a fully managed service provided by Amazon Web Services. It kind of simplifies the process of protecting and managing data across various AWS services and on-premises environments. So AWS Backup allows users to centralize and automate backup of their data, making it easy to meet business and regulatory compliance requirements. So that's critical for most of our users. One aspect of it is actually protecting their data, but it also means that they have to comply with both internal and external regulatory requirements, and which is made simplified by the entire service as such. So let's walk through what customers go through in terms of implementing a data protection strategy. And obviously, it all starts with the enterprise coming together to define a data protection strategy, which kind of puts together what are the factors that they would want to protect against in terms of what is the recoverability aspects, what is the data that they would want to protect against, and all those things. Once that particular data protection strategy has been generally set in stone, we now have to move into the design and implementation of such a data protection strategy. So what customers, large enterprise customers using AWS Backup have gone is to think about a reference architecture that they would want to implement and talk about all the threat vectors that they would want to protect against. A common reference architecture that most of our larger enterprise customers implement is the centralized AWS data bunker architecture. In simplified terms, what it means is that there will be independent workload accounts in the AWS organization that will continue to create recovery points based on their data that they would want to protect. And depending on the classification of the data that they're trying to protect, they would send a copy of that data into a separate data bunker account, which actually follows the principles of defense in depth. So when we apply all the defense in depth mechanisms, this data bunker account kind of becomes an isolated, virtually air-gapped account, which will be extending the protection aspects of the recovery points that they have. So this published reference architecture kind of walks you through all of the aspects that you'll have to consider in terms of how do you manage security keys, how do you work through the break loss workflows in case the data has to be accessed and all those things. So what I'm going to do is in the next slide, talk about how we could extend this protection of recovery points to create to cater to some of the threats that Naj has talked about earlier. So in the reference architecture, we kind of looked at how to implement the principle of least privileges using IAM policies. We also have opportunities to use resource policies to secure your data in the AWS Backup vaults, but also implement data corridors that will secure the movement of data between your workload accounts and your central bunker accounts. And we also talked about the multi-account architecture, where the data kind of gets concentrated in an isolated account, so that you can apply the principles of least privileges and defensive mechanisms. And we also talk about the KMS key security best practices, which allows you to apply principles to secure your data in the event of KMS key loss. But there's also opportunities for you to automatically respond to non-compliances using AWS Backup Audit Manager. But moving forward, after let's move on. After having secured all of your backups in an isolated virtually air-gapped AWS account, most of the questions that our customers ask are generally in the form of, I've now secured my backups in an account based on your best practices. How do I really ensure these backups are good? How do I ensure these backups are recoverable? And how do I know that these backups does not contain any ransomwares? And just want to be sure that the resilience aspects of the backup is actually taken into consideration. So what are the gaps? That's the basic question. So let's dive deeper into a reference architecture on how we could work together between AWS Backup and Elastio as a partner to mitigate some of this risk. So as you can see on the screen, we had a reference workload account in which backups get created based on a backup policy applied to that workload account. And based on a particular data retention strategy, protection strategies, the data gets copied from the workload account into the bunker account for longer term retention. So you might have a shorter retention strategy in the workload account for recoverability aspects, and you have a longer retention aspect in bunker account for data protection for both regulatory compliance and ransomware mitigation kind of strategies. So when we push forward this particular reference architecture, what we are proposing here is that we would be using a simple workflow manager, which could be based on the data protection strategies that you have within your organization, to push copies of the recovery point from this bunker account into a separate isolated account that you can see in this reference architecture. So we generally term this as a forensic account. So one of the advantages of using a forensic account is that it kind of contains the blast radius of the analysis that you're trying to do. If you're not really sure about what threats a particular recovery point might contain, which might be exposed through a restored instance, the best possible option is to create a separate forensic account and have all of your analysis done in that particular account. So if we further expand this particular forensic account with a powerful partner like Elastio, what happens is that after a recovery point has been copied from this particular bunker account into the forensic account, Elastio starts analyzing these recovery points. So it starts from the simple process of importing the contents of the recovery points into the vault powered by Elastio and performing a two-stage approach of analysis. One is the actual malware analysis, which actually looks for detonators of ransomware, which are the dormant threats that Naj was mentioning earlier in the slides. But we also, Elastio also goes ahead and then scans for the compromises that are caused by the detonators in the event it has already been detonated. So if you look at the actual analysis, it is actually twofold. One is the malware analysis, which looks for threats, and the second one is the ransomware analysis, which actually looks for the compromises in the files. So the reason why we want to do both these analysis in a single scan is that a malware analysis might tell you threats that you could easily remove by just deleting those files. But the actual ransomware analysis kind of tells you that the compromises that is existing in the files. And why do we really do these things? So if you really look at the entire setup that we talked about in the previous slide, there will be backups created on a particular resource on a regular basis. That's what we generally call the recovery point lineage. So the good thing about this particular integration is that based on the scans done by Elastio on each and every recovery point, or the recovery points based on your choice, you now have a choice to decide out of the lineage of the recovery points created, at what point a particular compromise really started happening. So the good thing is that you now really have the option of just going back to the previous recovery point, which is being reported clean by Elastio, and mark them as the last good node backup. And by using that last good node backup, the resilience aspect of your service would be fortified by allowing you to recover from a good node data. So let's move on this. So I'm going to hand it over back to Naj, and then he would be talking about how to build a ransomware recovery solution with all items that we talked about. Naj.
Thank you, Sally. So yes, so let's talk about our data integrity pipeline. So when AWS Backup tells us there's a recovery point available, we ingest that into our ScaleZ storage component, and from that we run it through our data integrity pipeline. So that in pipeline it looks for things like application corruption, storage vulnerabilities. It also does deep inspection for threats. For example, as Sabbath mentioned, ransomware and malware inside of each file within that data set. We also come back and recovery test it. So the recovery testing is interesting. So in this, the current version of the product, what it does, it scans the file system to make sure that the file system has integrity. So if it doesn't, for some reason, if that file system's corrupted, it'll give you a warning as well. So all this happens in that data integrity pipeline. And if it pops through that pipeline and it's clean, we come back with an assured recovery, and then AWS Backup is notified that through the artifacts and through Event Bridge, and you can configure that as a customer where you want that output to go, whether it's Security Hub or your own SIEM or SOC. It's totally up to the customer. So that's run on each and every backup optionally. So the company then has certainty as you run through this process that recovery point's clean, corruption-free, and non-compromised. So let's talk a little bit more about the threat detection workflow. So Sabbath alluded to this. So the recovery point is triggered by AWS Backup. It's brought into Elastio, and we run 2 scans against the data. So the malware scan is basically a signature scan. So it uses common software for that. So it scans every file within that data payload and looks for all types of malware. The ransomware scan is a lot of core technology here, but basically it offers 3 algorithms. It goes through a metadata analysis, it goes through a behavioral analysis, and it also looks for signatures as well. So those 3 passes of every file within that data set are checked for compromises. So we're looking for signs of ransomware. And if we find it, we highly prescribe what we found. So we will tell you it's WannaCry, or it's another type of ransomware, and we'll tell you exactly what files were impacted by this scan. Our security team on the back end, we've analyzed over 1,800 ransomware variants and families, and we've built that into our ML engine, and they're constantly looking for new threats on the network. We do cooperate with open source. We share information with other vendors because we're all hunting for the bad guys and trying to solve this problem for our customers. So it's a big problem, but our SOC team has done that job, and they'll continue to do so. These artifacts then, like I said, they do contain very detailed information about exactly what's going on for the threat that we've identified, so they can be remediated. Now, Sabbath mentioned the recovery side. You can go back to the last known clean, no problem. You can also surgically recover individual files if you need to repair the infected recovery point. You can also restore these things to a sandbox in isolation and do the forensics analysis this way. One thing that's very interesting, because we keep a history over time that the customer can configure, then when it comes to the forensics side, the security teams have the availability now to go back in time and look for where these threats happen and exactly how they happened. And that threat intel can then be pushed to other sources of threat intel across your network to come up with a reason for the compromise and hopefully remediate the problem wherever it was caused. So in summary, it's really a better together story with Elastio and AWS Backup. So the integration is seamless. There's no agents on our side, no agents on AWS Backup, obviously. There's no changes to the existing AWS Backup configuration, so your policies stay intact. They run as they are. You just layer Elastio into the account where you wish to do the scanning in. So that can be any of the accounts that makes most sense for your business, and that's it. You're done. So it makes it a very seamless integration. The other couple things are important here. The data custody remains with the customer. That's a very important concept. obviously AWS Backup maintains data custody with the customer. That's a given, but so does Elastio. So that data never leaves the customer's control. It's never egressed anywhere. We don't have the capability to do that. So it stays within the account that Elastio is deployed in. The data integrity pipeline, as we mentioned, we do have deep scanning capabilities of over 1,800 plus ransomware and malware and application corruption. So we do that type of scanning. The backend storage engine for Elastio is highly optimized to ingest large amounts of information, does global compression and dedupe as well to keep the data footprint lower. But there's primitives built into that system, so the scanning becomes very quick. And the reason is you might have an FLA of a recovery point, say, of 1 hour. If the scans take 2 hours, you just missed your SLA. So everything we do is to stream down that scanning time to make sure we can get through those processes as quickly as possible. The detailed identification of threats, it's very comprehensive, and we prescribe to the customer exactly what's going on. So that's very unique in the cloud. So we can really pinpoint what the issues are and give the security teams a safe way to recover and a more intelligent way to determine what the root cause was. The pricing, we get asked this a lot. It's a very straightforward pricing. We price on basically the monthly high water mark of the amount of storage that's ingested. We do same pricing as Amazon in terms of monthly or annual reserve pricing. And the platform is available in the marketplace. So you can pick it up now as a free trial, you can pull it down, try it with your AWS Backup implementation. There's also help there's documentation on how to do that integration. It's a simple install of Elastio, and then you deploy a CFN that integrates the two platforms together. And that's the extent of it. So I'll pass it back to Kathy.
Thank you. Give me a second to go back on video. That's awesome. Thank you for your questions. Continue to put those into the Q&A panel, and we'll get to those when we finish up here. Now I want to introduce Chris Daniluk. Chris is a managed service provider focused on applications running in AWS with actually a very special niche of what he likes to call applications on fire. So without further ado, Chris is going to share some of the use cases he's seen with his clients for Elastio. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Kathy. Hi, everyone. So today I wanted to talk about 3 different use cases that we found for Elastio with our customers, in particular ones that don't lend themselves well to either historical backup products or truly cloud native solutions like just pure snapshots. The first is cloud native backups in general. When you have complicated requirements, we've been able to use Elastio in a couple of different ways here. And 2 big use cases are one, when you are backing up any type of Windows environment and you want to make sure that virtual snapshots inside of Windows are working correctly. Elastio can actually recovery test those backups for you. So in addition to looking for malware and ransomware, it also makes sure that you have restorable backups in place. Traditional snapshots are simply what it sees when it takes the snapshot. And without that consistency of VSS, you don't necessarily know that you have a restorable backup. Building on that, we've also used custom scripts before and after backups are run, both on Windows and Linux, where Elastio can wrap the backup job, so to speak, in custom scripts if you need to, for example, quiesce a file system, stop a process, put something into a no cache state, anything that you might be accustomed to in traditional enterprise backup solutions. You can actually do with Elastio, even using the AWS Backup integration. And so that's been very helpful where we have customers that have maybe 90% of their backups are standard snapshots are sufficient, but they've got a couple of things, typically legacy processes and things like that, where they do need a little bit extra. And Elastio makes it very easy to sort of tie that into the process. The other use case I wanted to talk about is being able to know that you can rebuild an entire environment from your backups. So we had a customer that had a unique requirement of revenue generating systems. So think SaaS as an example. They needed to be able to recover 80% of their revenue from total loss within 72 hours. That was their goal. And while there were backups in place, it was difficult to utilize what was there within the SLA that was defined. In particular, because if you were to restore a bad backup, find out that that backup was infected with ransomware, you literally had to start over and go back to an older backup and sort of triangulate your position and guess what was the oldest clean backup that you had. Obviously hoping that you had a clean backup at all. So with Elastio, one, you have the ability to separately vault the backups and give yourself protection to ensure that the backups are immutable. Two, you also have the ransomware and malware scanning so that you can identify when the backups became corrupted. And that enables you to restore exactly the right backup. And it also allows for you to concurrently do forensic investigation and do backup recovery. So your traditional IT and DevOps teams can start rebuilding the environment while your security teams doing forensic investigation to see what went wrong. And then the third use case I wanted to talk about, and again, is highlighting different dimensions of what Elastio brings to the table from one common solution, is ephemeral instances. A lot of people don't think about ephemeral instances as needing recovery at all. If you think about servers in an autoscale group, other type of EC2 instances that you create using various automation techniques, you expect them to come and go. And the beauty of them is that if something goes wrong with them, you kill the instance, you let a new one be created, and you start over and get on with your life. That's great from an availability perspective, but when something goes wrong, you've deleted everything you need to know to figure out what went wrong. So we've used Elastio with several customers to back up instances in autoscale groups and other type of ephemeral instances. And in doing so, we have a customer where we actually detected a web shell that was implanted on an ephemeral instance. And we were able to identify it within an hour of it happening, recover to a previous known good state, concurrently work on a fix to prevent it from being hacked again. And the last part was possible because we were able to access old logs, the state of the server at the time it was attacked, and see how exactly it was exploited in order to come up with a way to block the attack. That's extremely powerful from a forensic capability. The front door in most organizations in AWS is ephemeral or serverless of some kind. And being able to detect when something goes wrong at the point of breach is the most important thing you can do to then recover from it, see what went wrong, find out how to stop it from happening again, and buy yourself time to get a root cause fix in place. So in all three of these, we were able to use Elastio in very different ways with the AWS Backup integration to make more recoverable backups and be able to target when backups became, so to speak, infected, so that we could restore the newest clean backup with confidence, know that it was recovery tested, and be able to investigate concurrently to recovery. So all of that was possible just leveraging what Elastio brought to the table for us, for our customers.
Great, thank you, Chris. We've got some great questions for you all, so give me just a minute. I'm going to make sure we've got everybody on video here. All right, first question, and I believe Saba, this is probably for you. The question was, I've always been told that snapshots aren't backups. Can you address that?
Yeah, sure. So I could talk to you about from an AWS standpoint, looking at EBS snapshots for that nature. So the reason why we refer to them as snapshot is because it kind of captures the state of that particular storage, underlying storage service at that point in time. But when you try to restore from that particular snapshot, what really is required is to go through the entire lineage of the snapshots that was created until the original full backup to be able to reconstruct the volume that you're trying to restore. So in that way, Snapshots can be sometimes equivalent to a backup, but in the way that we kind of do the restores. But probably in the world of AWS or of cloud, it could be referring to two different things, because backups are generally talked about the complete state and data of the actual underlying storage, whereas like snapshots are nothing but a point in time metadata information about that underlying storage. But from an AWS backup perspective, whenever we refer to something as snapshot, it is actually a restorable backup in by itself. I hope that answers the question.
Great, thank you. Anyone else have anything to add to that? Chris, Naj?
I can just say
yeah,
that.
Go ahead, Naj, sorry.
Go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say, Naj mentioned earlier that the snapshots are opaque, and one of the unique things that Elastio does is it ingests the snapshots into its storage engine and converts them into more traditional backups. So you can do things like file level visibility, file level restore, compares from snapshot to snapshot, and it also uses some, I guess I'll call it magic under the hood, because that sounds cool. Magic under the hood to re-baseline those snapshots periodically so that they can be more quickly restored when you need them. So, in a traditional AWS snapshot, to Savitha's point, the older the snap, the older the original snap becomes, the longer it takes to merge that snap chain and recover your backup. Elastio reduces that time quite a bit. So you have both visibility into, you have three things. You have visibility into the backup. You have recoverability testing, meaning that there's a basic restore of the snapshot to make sure that it's consistent and usable. And then that can be extended with scripting on top of that. And then you have the ability to quickly restore those snapshots as needed. So at the end of the day, pretty much all backups are the same under the hood as far as snapshots versus traditional backups go. But Elastio gives some of those more comforting features on top of that so that you feel like you actually have a usable backup that you can see into and understand the contents of.
Great, thanks. Naj, does that address what you wanted to add there?
Great answer. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, next question. This would be for you, Naj. Does Elastio analysis look through all of the data or just metadata such as headers, etc.?
No, we look through all of the data. So it's we do look at the headers and the metadata as well. That's one of the three approaches. But we look at all the data within that file.
And to be clear, maybe some clarification around, are you actually seeing the data or deeply inspecting? Because we talked about data custody earlier.
Right. So the custody remains in the customer account, so we never touch it. We don't have access to it per se. The scanning happens within the context of the customer account, but we are scanning each file that we see in the recovery point.
Got it. Okay. Hopefully that answers that question. One thing I wanted to ask is, you talk about the deep inspection and the way that that's done through Scale Z. Can you talk a little bit about why perimeter security isn't catching all of the ransomware malware and the extra layer of protection that Elastio brings?
Yeah, so first of all, the perimeter protection is mandatory. You must have it. We're not advocating anything as such, but as evidenced with the scale of the attacks that are happening today, the bad guys are getting through, and we consider backup data protection the last line of defense. So we're there to catch, if anything gets through, we're there to safeguard that data and make sure you can recover if all else fails. So this simply happens through a misconfiguration of an IAM policy, a simple vulnerability inside of a AMI that can happen. So a bad guy can exploit that, drop a payload, and boom, you're in. So there's many ways for the bad guys to get in, and they're very, very smart nowadays, and they're getting more and more clever on how they can attack these environments. So, that's, part of what Gartner was pushing is to say, look, focus some energy on resilience, because at the end of the day, you're going to get it, you're going to get hit, and just make sure that you're ready to recover when you are.
Great. I'm actually going to go back to another slide for this question. I think it might be helpful. There we go. The question is, Can I move Elastio closer to production? That might be for you, Naj.
Yes, so yes, the customer can make that choice. They can move Elastio into any of these accounts. You know, what Sabbath was alluding to in his bunker architecture was a really smart way to isolate the data inside of that bunker account, so it limits who has access to it. It's immutable, it's air gapped, et cetera. And then to pull data out of that to do the forensic analysis. So this approach is very clean. But having said that, if you would like to move that Elastio into, for example, to the workload account, you can. And you can even bake in rules in there to decide what happens if we find an anomaly or a threat in the workload account. Meaning, do you replicate that data or not? That's a business decision that could be configured inside of the workflow manager.
Okay, question, do you also scan for malware or ransomware against FSX?
Great question. So we don't today. We will add that support coming up later in the year. The next piece that we're adding is S3. So we're going to support S3 scan, backup and scanning as well. And then closer to the end of the year, we'll have EFS and FSX scanning available.
Right, thank you for that question. Where
sorry,
is,
just to add to Naj's point. So like Naj was mentioning earlier, the component that does the import of data and scan on it can also be extended to file systems that could be presented to Elastio directly and use the CLIs and APIs of Elastio. So that's also an opportunity if the heavy lifting of opening up an FSX recovery point and present the files directly to Elastio can be done by the customer as such. So that's also an opportunity. So like I was trying to point out earlier, there's every possible Lego block being provided to you. How you put them together is always, based on how much complexity and maintenance that you can bring into the entire protection aspect.
yeah, makes sense. Thank you, Sabbath. Naj, I believe this is for you. Where is the data hosted?
It's within the customer account. So in this case, that's on the screen. So the data is kept inside of this forensics account. So it never leaves the custody of the customer ever.
Great, thank you. All right. If anyone else has any questions, if you could please put them in the Q&A. Otherwise, I think we might, oh, here we go. When FSX is supported, will you be performing context indexing against all files?
Yes, we'll have an index of all files, yes. And that's part of our ingestion mechanism. So yes, we'll have an index, plus we'll scan them for both malware and ransomware.
Great, thank you. What AWS services are supported today, Naj?
So with this integration, it's EBS and EC2, and of course AMIs. So that's baked in out of the box today. In the future, with this integration, we'll get into things like EFS, FSX. We're excited about that. Elastio will offer S3 shortly. We also support RDS today, just so you know. We do that from a CLI way, in a very special way. We do logical protection there of the databases, which offers its own set of benefits and protection against corruption and so on. So we do have that baked in as well.
Got it. One thing I know we did not touch on is Elastio is focused on AWS customers, but can you talk about if anyone's running any workloads in Azure or GCP, can those be ingested?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Yeah, we do have several customers that are running workloads in GCP. And Elastio is hosted in your account, the customer account inside of AWS. So they're actually pulling data, pushing data actually from GCP into Amazon as a DR capability. So for example, could be running SQL, the SQL service inside of GCP, logically backing up that data into AWS, and I can restore that to RDS for DR purposes. So, and it's all in an application consistent and application aware way. So with a simple set of CLI commands, you can implement that, as Sabbath was mentioning. That's all available via scripting.
Great, thank you, Maj. All right, last call for any questions. All right, looks like we're all set. So we will make this recording available if you'd like to take another look. We get back to the end here, how you could find out some more information. All right, so as Naj mentioned, Elastio is available in AWS Marketplace. There's a free trial and a free tier available. The differentiation meaning the free trial is a fully functional, I believe 30-day trial. Naj, is that correct?
Correct.
And the free tier is for smaller businesses that might not have the quantity of workloads to cover. So that's available there. You can get in touch with your AWS representative if you want to talk to them about either AWS Backup, Elastio, or both. You can reach out to the Elastio team at sales@elastio.com. And if you have any applications that are on fire and need some help, contact the folks at Rhythmic. You can get them at sales@rhythmictech.com. So thank you for attending today. We appreciate your time. Thank you.